Hi, I'm Dr. Lisa Miller.
And I'm Nazar Yassin.
Welcome to Soul Searching, where we discover how your inner journey
fuels your outer impact. And here on the show, we're always trying to find spiritual solutions to social problems, which is why I'm so grateful to have a sponsor like the Fetzer Institute.
The Fetzer Institute holds the mission of building the spiritual foundation of a more loving world, an ideal thought partner.
Much like our guest on today's episode. Can't wait to share it with you.
Anything that we put on a pedestal that is not our higher power, I think can't hold the weight of our entire life. Going out and doing something for someone and not expecting anything in return is so compelling. It's so disarming to people. The commandment of love God and love people, I think is very, very simple. And I think if you do those two things, I think you're on the path.
I'm very grateful and delighted that Matthew Thompson is joining us. Matthew Thompson, you all recognize from Mighty Pursuit, his extremely popular, very deep thinking podcast, in which you integrate all four pillars of health and wellness as brought forward by the former Surgeon General: physical, mental, social, and spiritual health.
Yeah.
So today, we're so grateful you accepted our invitation to flip the table and come as the guest and share your story behind Matthew and Mighty Pursuit.
Yeah.
So generally, we ask if you might tell us about your journey to the Matthew that you are today. So your inner journey that's led to your great outer impact.
Yeah.
Who is young Matthew?
Young Matthew. Yeah, I think my spiritual journey and awakening of sorts really started back in 2016. I'm 36 now. So 2016, I had first met my wife, and it was kind of like a whirlwind romance. Like we met, and then, I don't know, 2 weeks later, we're talking about getting married.
Wow. You knew.
And I think that it was so strong. It was such a strong feeling. And on one end, it was kind of like euphoric, but then on the other end, there started to be some things that I was just like, this is a little weird the way I was feeling inside. At this point in my life, I feel like I was kind of maybe spiritually apathetic. I wasn't really in a wrestling phase, but I wasn't really thinking about it too much. But I had always romanticized relationships my entire life. I don't know, I kind of am romantic. And so the idea of getting into a relationship and falling in love and all this stuff was sort of, I guess, what you would call, in more spiritual terms, an idol. It was something I put on a pedestal. If I get this, then it's going to solve my entire life. And so we would have these moments that would be so beautiful and euphoric for me. And it's kind of like the honeymoon phase of a relationship. But at the same time, I noticed a drumming up of anxiety that was happening. When we weren't together, and then I started getting racing thoughts about, what if we break up? Or nothing was wrong with the relationship, but I was getting all these sorts of thoughts. And about 6 months into the relationship, there was just a series of things that had happened where I was like, okay, there's something off about my brain or the way that I'm thinking. And I had always kind of suspected that there was something that I thought differently. And throughout my entire life, I had went to a psychiatrist, and they gave me ADHD medications or stuff like that. But I was like, is it really that? I don't feel like it's that. And so anyway, I ended up getting diagnosed with OCD in the fall of 2016. And I learned that what I was experiencing at that moment was a form of OCD. It's called relationship OCD. And so in OCD, there's an object of your affection that you care deeply about. Now, it could be your health, it could be your relationship, it could be work, and you fear certain outcomes happening. And so what you end up doing is you end up obsessing and then doing compulsions to kind of neutralize that. It's almost like you're trying to gain 100% control over your reality, that nothing bad is going to happen to you and nothing bad is going to happen to the thing that you're obsessed with. And I learned about that, and then all of a sudden I started looking back on my life, and things started making more sense about the way that I like behaved in certain situations. And so that moment, I think, was really the start of a more inner journey of becoming self-aware of the way that my mind works and the way that I uniquely see reality. So, yeah.
It started with love.
Yeah.
That's cool because, I mean, that's a very spiritual story, by the way. Like, I mean, from ancient philosophy, right? If you look at like Greek philosophy, there was chaos, there was emptiness. And the very first thing that appeared in the universe was eros, or love. And that's what gave rise to the material world that we live in, Gaia, and the spiritual world that we live in, Tartarus. And so your spiritual journey began with love. It's cool.
When you heard that diagnosis, was it a relief? Did things make sense? How did that sit with you? How did it land?
I don't believe that like we'll never, there's a lot of things I would say we're never going to find a cure for this, but at that point in the literature today, a lot of people say that there isn't a cure that would just reverse OCD, although some people who take psychedelics now are starting to challenge that. But I think at that time, it was like sort of a relief. I think if there's chaos going on in your brain and you don't know what's happening, it's almost like there was a split that happened in my life where there was a before and an after. Like the before was something seems a little off, but I don't know what it is, but I guess my brain works normally. And then after is like the veil was torn off, and then all of a sudden I can now identify how that has a hold on different areas of my life and the challenges that have been presented. And so I think that diagnoses can be very helpful because it helps you understand yourself. I think at the same time, diagnoses can be a box that you get put into.
That's true, yeah.
And you could be weighed down by the diagnosis, and then you almost like become your diagnosis. Like I am OCD, or I am depression, or I am something else.
You become the label.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you could do that with a physical health thing too. And so that just like takes over your entire life. And so, yeah, it's definitely been a journey with that.
We could put ourselves in a box with just about anything. I'm smart, I'm not smart. I'm fast, I'm not fast. I'm successful, I'm not. I mean, so it feels like from out here, it may have been empowering to you to have this lens where things now made sense. What did you, from that seed of awareness, start to see? What mobilized from that, before and after?
Before I met my wife, I wasn't really thinking about spirituality or wellness or all of those different things. Just wasn't really the primary thing I was focused on. And I don't even know how I would have gotten introduced to that. And I think that there were a lot of pieces that started to be connected. And so she was a registered dietitian, introduced me to nutrition. And so that really got me interested into kind of the physical piece of our wellness with our body and stuff like that. And then I got this whole entire diagnosis with OCD, and that was really a revelation for my mental health. And then so I started into therapy, but still I felt like the importance I was placing on my relationship wasn't meant to be that much emphasis placed on relationship. I think if you hold all your hope on somebody, I think that it's just bound to cripple and fail. Like someone can't hold the entire weight of your life and your happiness and everything else. And so even in the midst of my diagnosis, I still feel like that was something I was struggling with. And then I started going through therapy. And so we ended up moving out to Seattle, and the only people that we knew out there was a couple, and we didn't have anything to do. And so they invited us to church. And so when we went out there and then we went to a service, it was really refreshing for me. It was a completely new perspective, and it kind of opened my spiritual eyes to something bigger in the universe. And from there, we ended up
what was said in that service, or what happened in that service? Was it how the people behaved, or what?
I think it started with the communicator on the stage, and the way that he was talking about God, and it felt like in terms that I could relate to. I think earlier in my life, I had grown up and like my parents had taken me to church and stuff like that, but it wasn't this. It was kind of more like a kind of ritualistic type of environment. You walk in, you just hear the pastor, you leave or whatever. And so this was an environment where there were a lot of people that were my age, which was weird to me. We've talked about this on my podcast, but there's been, a kind of spiritual exodus in the United States. And I think as a millennial, I was on, the back end of that, where most people that were my age were not talking about these things. And so to go into an environment where tons of people were like in their 20s and 30s, we ended up joining like a small group. And then we were introduced to a wave of probably like 50 people that were all around our age. And it was kind of like the most profound sense of community for me. And that's when like things really started getting crystallized, like the whole mind, body, and spirit thing of like, had the mental health diagnosis, I was starting to introduce stuff with physical health and nutrition, but then to have sort of a spiritual awakening of sorts. And then I just came to believe, I think, that anything that we put on a pedestal that is not our higher power, I think can't hold the weight of our entire life. Everything, I think that at that point, it was like everything in the world is finite, right? So it's here today, gone tomorrow. Like your business could be gone, like your dog could be gone, like your parents, your wife, everything could be taken away from you. But I think your sense of spirituality is the one thing that can't be taken away from you. And so that's when I feel like I started to have more of an awakening. And that was about a year after the OCD diagnosis.
Wow. So you never need to worry that the ultimate source, the God, is taken away from us.
Yeah.
Yeah, impermanence doesn't matter when you're talking about something that's eternal and permanent, right? Everything else is impermanent.
Cannot be worry. There cannot be loss. There cannot. That's extraordinary. So you had a spiritual. Did that help in your deep seat of being when you felt close to God with the concerns of loss?
Yeah. So, I mean, at that point, I had a lot of, I guess, more mystical type experiences. So, I did not live in the Pacific Northwest for most of my life. And so we went out there and then, we'd start going hiking and then we started going up in the mountains. And there was just one time where it was just me and my dog, like walking up a mountain, and the mountain was like 10,000 feet in the air. And so this was in Olympic National Park. And, I didn't really know what to expect. I just was going up to the mountaintop. This is probably like the second or third time I had hiked. And, as we started getting up, like everything, it was a very clear day. Everything started crystallizing. And then I started getting higher and higher. And I could start seeing the mountaintops that were in other regions. And it was, 4 different mountaintops, and they're probably like 3 or 4 hours away. Like I was that high up in there, and I could see all the way down to Portland, which was like, it's like 4 or 5 hour drive. And at that point, I don't know, this overwhelming feeling, it's very hard to describe, overcame me. And like, I literally started like crying because I thought it was just so beautiful.
Yeah.
And there was a series of experiences that I had like that. And I think when you first come into being spiritually, I think you might have some experiences like that. But I think that over the journey, over the past 8 years since then, there's been full of ups and downs, but there's been moments like that I've experienced that are like really, really special, that it's just undeniable, like what I had experienced in that moment, and I can't take it away. So
Mountaintops.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, there's something that's a story as old as spirituality is, Moses goes up the mountain, Mount Olympus. I mean, something about having that perspective on the world. How does that feeling of surrender relate to the desire for control that you felt? How are those two related?
Yeah, I feel like that's been a daily battle, even since the beginning of releasing control. At one end, like a lot of things that we worry about never end up happening. And on the other end, there are just certain things that you can't control. Like, okay, we're all going to die one day, right? You can't control that. And then I think that there are other things that, if there are chronically things in your life that you can't control and that are ongoing, it almost becomes like a daily, I need to release this. And I think the only way that I've figured out how to go through those things is to trust that there is a larger plan unfolding. I found a lot of your insights, to be honest, really helpful on this.
I'm so grateful. So handing it over, ineffectively,
Yeah.
looking at life as it's a duet. It's you and God.
Yeah. So like hindsight being 2020, and no, there being some things, I think you could see that. But then there's other things that are just so devastating that could happen in the course of somebody's life where I still wrestle with, like, okay, someone dies or you go through an illness for a long time, and maybe you don't get that answer in this life. But I still think that you have to hold on to the fact that there is something deeper at play. And I think if you could hold on to that meaning in the moment and that hope, that prevents you going down a route of like nihilism and kind of like hopelessness and whatnot. And so I think that's been a big piece for me.
And are there rituals or practices you've developed that help you manage the overwhelming nature of some of those emotions?
Yeah, I think nature has been something that has been very connecting for me. And that's something that every week I feel myself doing, and in the summer in New York and doing a bike ride even down the Hudson River, I find myself having the most kind of mystical experiences when I'm riding on a bike. I don't know what it is. Journaling has been another thing that I've never really let go over the past 8 years. Reading scripture is another one. I think community would be another one.
Spiritual community.
Yeah, like having like a spiritual community. And I think that that's hard. That's hard in a place like New York. But I feel like that's what people are really looking for. I think through my studies, especially in 2017, 2018, I think the early movement after the death of Jesus, I think that's one of the most compelling things I've ever seen in human history. So here you have kind of like a persecuted type people that grew from like nothing to like 1 million people by the year, I think 300, which there's no marketing, there's nothing. And it was really like 20, 30 people in houses that were gathering around a table every single week. And people on the outside were so drawn in by the way not only those people were loving each other, but the way that they loved the kind of community that was around them. And I think that picture for me has always stayed in my mind of what community could look like, a generous type community, a community that where it's kind of a two-way street where you can share the hardships that you're going through, you could share your emotions. If somebody's in need, that is another thing that I thought was so compelling about that is like, let's just say someone's short $4,000 on rent and you have a community of 15, 20 people and it was just like, oh, we got you. Mm-hmm. I think most people don't have one person in a community that they feel like they could rely on, but to have a group of 10 or 15 people like that. So that's always something that I've kind of held on to. What would it look like to recreate that in the modern world? Obviously, we don't live in Israel 2,000 years ago in the environments that was happening, but what does that look like in New York? And that's still a question mark for me. So,
does it feel feasible? Love begets love.
I think there are a lot of modern forces that are trying to undo that. I think a lot of the technology that we have, a lot of the convenience, the commitment, a lot of these ideas, which are commitments an ancient idea. I would say it's almost even a virtue to stay committed to somebody. So yeah, I think it is totally possible. I think it requires buy-in between different people. I think it requires people who would be willing to lay down their life or lay down other opportunities. And then if you look at your life in totality and it's like, I'm going to stay rooted in this place and forego other opportunities because I feel a sense of commitment to this group of people, which is not how people think today. It's normally like individualism. It's normally thinking about any opportunity that might come. And so, yeah, I do think it's possible, but it requires commitment.
Yeah. And I mean, two of these ingredients that you're sort of alluding to, right? Authenticity, like the authenticity of saying, I don't have this. I need some help, right? That's an authentic form of expression.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to authentically communicate in today's society when it's all about flexing, right? You get on Instagram and you're like, look how great my life is. And there's no authenticity there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the other piece of it is the support piece, the altruistic piece, where it's, okay, you need something, I got you. Like, I'm going to sacrifice something or take my time to support you. That's also pretty hard to do today in an environment where things like X exist and people are just shouting at each other, right? Because the algorithms are sort of putting you in different buckets and different echo chambers. It's hard. It's hard to solve those two things. You're right.
Yeah, it requires like self-sacrificial love, which I think in the earliest parts of my spiritual journey, when I saw that modeled by Jesus, I think is like very compelling, because I think at the end of the day, going out and doing something for someone and not expecting anything in return is so compelling. It's so disarming to people, especially in a place like New York or Los Angeles. Yeah, I mean, I feel like everybody's networking, everybody's trying to get something.
Right. Yeah.
And so to go out and be kind is just so disarming. And I think that those are the seeds of building something deeper with other people.
New York is a unique opportunity in that regard, right? Because whereas in LA, everybody's kind of in one industry. So the expectation is when you're meeting somebody is like, oh, you're in this industry.
Yeah.
How do I navigate this? Because this is like a business meeting almost, right? Same thing in Silicon Valley, which is it's a one industry town. New York, there's so many different industries that it might be a little bit easier to have that just, I'm meeting you, we can be authentic. I'm just offering you something. I don't need anything in return.
I think New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, those types of cities are cities where people go to try to accomplish something. And I think that you could feel that in those cities, that is the thing that's like driving people. And so I think in some ways there could be something very beautiful about that, about living in New York. I think that drive to create, I feel that within myself, but it's like a double-edged sword, because at the end of the day, if that becomes, like I said about the relationship, that becomes the only thing in your life that you're resting your hope on, I think it could be problematic.
Your word was idolatry.
Yeah.
So anything can be the object of our idolatry.
Yeah.
If it's elevated above God, if it's elevated above the flow that God puts before us.
Yeah, because it can't hold the weight of whatever your desires are.
So I'm still at the top of the 10,000-foot mountain, you and your dog.
Yeah.
What did you feel? Can you go back there? What did it? I see the vista. I see the mountaintops all the way to Portland. What did you feel? What awakened?
I mean, I use the word euphoria, but that almost feels like drug-like. There was such a profound sense of joy and connectedness, this feeling of, I guess, almost being like loved or held, something like that.
Did you know that was real? Like if I put my finger on a hot stove and I feel heat, that stove is real.
Yeah. So I mean, there immediately started to be a differentiation in experiences that I had that felt like ordinary, regular experiences, and then experiences that fell so far outside that. And that was one of them. And I think that also what nature does is it opens you up to how big the world is. When you're in an environment like that is so vast and grand and beautiful, and to think about this being created was just wild. And so there's also a sense of wonder that I was feeling, I think, at that moment as well, and seeing that sort of landscape. It's one thing to see a picture of those types of things, but then it's a totally another thing to actually be immersed in that type of environment.
Totally.
So.
And you were alone with your dog. You were alone.
Yeah.
You and God.
We were literally talking about this exact thing today, which is like the interrelation between humility and awe and wonder. They're two sides of the same
Well,
coin.
and you on the beach.
And then being alone in nature. And I'd remark to Lisa that in some ways, like, silence is the sound of God, right? And when you're in a place where it's just you and nature, the universe, whatever you want to call it, that's when you can kind of tap into that divinity, that source, God, whatever people want to call it.
Yeah, I love that. The idea of humility being kind of some of the results of awe and wonder. You kind of, it quantifies how small you are.
Yeah.
But also there's like a personal aspect of that as well. To feel seen in the midst of your own smallness is just incredible.
What happened next? You're in Seattle, and it sounds, I will say, in the year from 0 to 300, that was my favorite period in studying Christian history as well. What you had in Seattle reminds me of those small groups of people. You said you were in a small group, and it was an extraordinary spiritual community. And I even felt a sense that it may have been an awakening community.
We live in a culture where there's almost sort of curated, like, vulnerability, a curated authenticity of what you choose to show people. But I think at that point in time in my life, I felt like I was finally in a community where I could just openly share about myself and just kind of lay it all bare. And that felt like one of the first times I've ever experienced something like that.
And that you would be met with love.
Yeah, love and acceptance. And yeah, that was just such a catalyst for me at that point.
And it sparked your mighty pursuit, which is mighty pursuit.
Yeah. What I started realizing was a lot of the times we give simple answers to things. And I think that the birth of Mighty Pursuit, and like even what has become our tagline of making sense of the human experience, has been my entire life of how to wrestle with the complexity of an idea. For example, if you are going through like a profound sense of suffering, if someone were to propose, we talked about this on the podcast about, just take a pill, or that's going to make it all better.
Mm-hmm.
It could make it better for like some people. It could help some people in some situations. And I feel like I started running up into that. And then I felt like I also started running up into entire parts of life being walled off. And it was only when I experienced this thing with my mental health, spiritual community, and then my wife was bringing this piece about nutrition, then I started seeing how all these connections between life like affect each other. Mm-hmm. Like if you look at sex, for example, a large percentage of our culture would say that that's just like a physical act. But there's a lot of things that are wrapped up in sex. Like your mental health could be terrible. And the reason why you're having sex with someone could be perhaps because you're in such a terrible state of mind. Your relationship dynamic also is affected by that. Your sense of purpose in the world and your spirituality also affects sex. And so I think the idea of mind, body, spirit, and putting the whole person back together became the catalyst for starting this company and really having kind of a posture of nuance as kind of the main variable in our company. I thought was deeply needed. So,
would you say that Mighty Pursuit, in a sense, is your ministry?
I was in a coffee shop in Seattle in probably about a year after all this stuff started happening. And it was the first time I was exposed to this another sort of mystical experience, which is like sort of like a download. Mm-hmm. I would describe it, where it just feels like this influx of like information. And it doesn't feel like it's coming from yourself. Mm-hmm. And it feels almost like a portal that's opened and then the portal closed.
Right.
And, the more I've read about this type of experience.
What came through? Was there an emotion with it? Was there a temperature? Was there words? What came through?
Well, a lot of the things that I'm saying right now, the seeds of the company started in that moment. Like I started getting a picture of all of it. And it's happened periodically through the past 8 years, where I'll get these just pictures of what we need to do, or the language that we need to use, or the path that we need to take. It's not something that I can like summon, but it just feels like information is like being revealed to you about the way that things will end up going.
Ahead of time.
Some kind of transmission or revelation almost.
Yes. Like a vision. I mean, I'm not like actually hearing something, but
in your mind's
you're
eye,
realizing.
you're receiving.
I'm seeing something.
What do you think manifests these downloads?
If you're very distracted, if you're very like not in any sort of spiritual awareness type of mode, if you're very much in go, 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 just do, I think potentially you will have less of those experiences. We had a neuroscientist on a few months ago, and he was talking about there being this part of the brain that activates when you are just a state of stillness, you're not doing anything. I think the purpose of life is very simple. I think the commandment of like love God and love people, I think is very, very simple. And I think if you do those two things, yeah, I think you're on the path.
What is Mighty Pursuit, and what are the future plans for Mighty Pursuit?
Yeah, so we are a media company, and the whole idea is that we want to put the whole person back together, mind, body, and spirit, and the theory of when we start compartmentalizing aspects of ourselves and start stripping them away. And so we've kind of like mapped what are the aspects of being human, and putting those things together. And so the earliest parts of that was in 2018. It got to a point where, I mean, this was in the early days. I mean, we basically had like, I don't know, 3,000 followers or something like that. And there weren't any obvious streams of income. And it was at this point of like, do I continue doing this like full time, or do I get a job? And this is not a prescription at all for anybody. But it just felt like at that moment, I felt there was a huge wall of like, go get a job, even though I could have. Around that time, I had interviewed at like, and we were living in Seattle. I had interviewed at Amazon and some of these like big tech companies, but I really felt like that wasn't the path. And so I was like, okay, the money is like dwindling. And then we started putting on like debt. We tried to get a small business loan that actually didn't ended up working out. And then it just kind of like all spiraled like a year later, where I had what I shared when I went to Columbia. It was like a sort of like a mental breakdown, essentially, where we didn't have any money. I didn't understand what was happening. I felt like this download experience had started the entire journey and created this conviction. So in a sense, it felt like it wasn't even my own decision. That feels weird to say, but I felt like I had to follow the download. I felt like I had to follow what had been shown to me. And then here I am, which was like probably 15 months later, and I'm like having a mental breakdown. This is when like OCD got like really bad, and I didn't sleep for 4 straight nights.
Jeez.
And I was having panic attacks all throughout the day. And it was just a slow period of getting better. I mean, this was like 6 years ago. And then we had a period where we started making money in the beginning of 2020. You start to see it unfold. Like some of the success that we've had has been a fulfillment of what I originally saw, but it didn't happen on the same timeline.
Didn't happen on your timeline.
And it came with like a lot of suffering. And so I think entrepreneurship in itself is in some ways it's an invitation into suffering for a lot of people.
100%. There's a funny saying in Silicon Valley. It's like when you're a founder, you sleep like a baby, meaning you wake up every 10 minutes crying.
Exactly.
Right. So it's a hard road.
And it feels like a lot of the stuff that is being built, at least in the billions of dollars like type companies, I don't know. It feels like a lot of the things have been like a net negative for people. And I am inspired, by what you're doing and by what you're doing. Because I think that part of it is confusing to me is why can't there be like a movement, a bigger movement with a lot of funding behind it that is redemptive, that is healthy for people, that points people to solutions that helps them thrive in their body and in their mind and their spirit.
Yeah.
But a lot of that isn't happening. So
And why we're so applauding of what you're doing.
Totally. There's so much. Unfortunately, this is like an investment thesis. It's like 7 deadly sins type of stuff.
yeah, exactly.
And the world needs far less funding of 7 deadly sins types of businesses and far more funding of businesses like yours, which are trying to encourage the flourishing of humans holistically.
Yeah. I mean, and it also requires that you don't compromise.
Mm-hmm.
That's like a big thing, right? So like there's a lot of shortcuts that people could take. There's a lot of things of like, like for example, it's interesting. I think 2 days ago it was announced that ChatGPT is going to start introducing erotica. And so I mean, porn itself is like a huge problem in our country.
10% of the bandwidth across the Atlantic.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, people are already addicted to it.
Yeah.
It's like push in your face. And now you're going on like Twitter. It's like legal. That's just on there, and Reddit and all these places. Mm-hmm. And so that is now being introduced. And if you look at interviews with the CEO of OpenAI, like a few months ago, he was talking about not doing that. But I think, people are speculating that potentially it's because that could be like a big revenue stream. Like the goal is to get people to stay on ChatGPT longer and longer and longer. That's how you're going to get more money. And so I guess my point is that it's very easy to compromise along the way and to start doing things or take money from certain people that you feel like, okay, I shouldn't take money from these people. Some people give away control of their company and then have to make concessions. And so I think staying on the path is a very spiritual journey.
100%.
Yeah.
It is so much harder to be a missionary than to be a mercenary.
Yeah.
But it is so much more fulfilling, and in the long term is so much more value creating, both for your company and for the externalities that your company creates. So it's a harder, longer path, but it's the right path.
I think it's really helpful to think in the terms of if something created us and is over everything, the idea of time itself is it's hard to even quantify. But like what goes by in a day for us or in a year for us, we might die and that might feel like 2 seconds.
Totally.
So whatever we're experiencing in our day-to-day life and the struggles and the challenges and the obstacles, I think if you keep that kind of cosmic view in, it keeps you a little bit more sane with the pain that time that's passing.
I got to tell you, I struggle with patience as well, as I was sharing with Lisa actually earlier today. And but as a father, I try to share with my kids sort of some of these ideas of, hey, like it's not your timeline. And our sense of time as humans is somewhat distorted because the way that we think of time is you look at like ants who build an anthill and then it rains and the anthill floods. And 2 weeks later, the ants are building the anthill in the same place. And you're like, why are you doing that? Like it's going to flood next time it rains. But for them, their timeline is so much shorter than ours, the same way that ours is so much shorter than the universe, the divine, the source. And so I think this is such an interesting conversation because your inner journey of starting with love and seeking an intrinsic sense of control over things evolved to a comfort in surrender.
Yeah.
A comfort in surrender. Entrepreneurs are visionaries. And you've surrendered your own inner vision to a greater vision that was downloaded to you. Entrepreneurs are planners and doers and executors. and you've surrendered the timeline to a greater timeline. And that's so interesting. That's such an amazing story of growth, of inner growth.
Yeah.
And a deeply spiritual entrepreneur.
Yeah.
My view of time is that sooner is not necessarily better. Time is an active variable. And in the alchemy, of course, it's source or God who knows when the right time is.
We all seek, like as a species, we all seek to create order from the chaos that is our lives. It's why we build tools, right? It's like since time immemorial. So it's intrinsic in all of us to try to provide some order, create some order to our lives. But at a certain point, you gotta just surrender. We can't control everything.
Yeah.
And it's useful to know that. I think for everybody listening at home, it's useful to know like, hey, look, you can't control everything, and it's okay. You got to kind of trust in something bigger than yourself, something that, in your words, can bear that burden. Not a human, not a job, not a career, not a project, but it's got to be something that can bear that burden.
Yeah, and I think it's a partnership. I think, at one end you could sit and do nothing and
Right.
just be like, okay, I don't have to do anything, and
Right.
then it's just gonna all like manifest itself. And I think then the other aspect of that is just working yourself to death and expecting that your hard effort is going to produce all the results. And I think it's just like it's in a tandem of the downloads, of the visions, of the things that you feel like you were put on the earth that you're meant to do, and receiving that and then working hard to do it. And then other moments are just waiting or surrendering more. And so I think it's just kind of this harmony of trying to figure out what is that pace or cadence of those two things relating to each other.
It's awakened entrepreneurship. It's a deep dialogue with the source.
Yeah.
We speak so much about carbon footprint, but what's our spiritual footprint? And it seems to me that as entrepreneurs, you're both walking a walk that is leaving a spiritual footprint. Matthew, if you had a parting recommendation for emerging entrepreneurs, what would it be? And if you had a parting recommendation for people on a spiritual quest with a hunger, maybe even an agitated hunger, what would that be?
Well, for the entrepreneurs, I would probably say count the cost of what you're about to get into would be one thing. I would say
what kind of cost?
Everything. I think financial, emotional, like really understanding the weight of what. So if you're catching a vision, if you feel like you're meant to do something, I think that at the end of the day, counting the cost of what will actually be required to live that out, and that how there might be scenarios that end up happening that you do not foresee. And I think, being business minded as well, like what is a practical end? I think you can have visions and that will guide your entire company, and there's a purpose and meaning behind it. But then, like, what's the actual practical path? And I think that people really need to consider the pairing of those two things, because you could easily get into this route of an entrepreneur of like, I'm just going to do it, and you don't have a plan in place as well. And so I think there needs to be a partnership there. I think the people on a spiritual quest, I would say that there are many different.
For people on a spiritual quest, maybe even frustrated or agitated.
Yeah, I would say the spiritual quest is, I think there's multiple ways to work through those things. And I think some roadblocks are emotional, some of them are intellectual. And so that has been such a big part of my own sense of spirituality, is intellectually wrestling with ideas. And so if there are more literature that you need to read, I mean, there's just so many podcasts today about every single topic that you could pour into. And I think that if someone feels like they're not traditionally a religious person, or that they don't fit that archetype, I think there are a lot of different ways that you could pop in. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
And for you, it has been
huge. The intellectual. Yeah.
in holding your spiritual life.
Yeah. About like what I know to be true. Yeah.
Based on fierce reason.
Yeah. Based on fierce reason. I mean, the last thing I'll share on that is that learning about near-death experiences. And I think that there's always been this kind of wrestle in science of like, you can never prove like God's existence. And so I think in learning about near-death experiences, especially ones where people literally die, right? And let's just say someone shoots me in the head, I like fall on the floor, and somehow I float outside my body, and then I go down the hallway, and then I could see someone at a vending machine and overhear their entire conversation. And somehow miraculously I come back into my body and I'm able to tell those people that what they were talking about. And that's called vertical perception. And a lot of people that have near-death experiences experience that, of seeing what's happening in the physical world, but not being in the physical world itself. And that anecdote, that one anecdote itself, to me is empirical evidence of the fact that this world isn't all that there is. And there are just thousands and thousands of cases of this that are very, very well documented by people much smarter than me, the scientists in this field. And so I think that coming back to that of like, what has been revealed? What do we know to be true? And then lining that up also with your mystical experiences has been something that has really helped me in my journey. So, yeah. And
ultimately it comes down to like a sense of humility, right? And the difference between science and scientism.
Yeah.
Right? Because scientism is, unless it's scientifically proven, we give no room to discuss it. Science is, this is scientifically proven, but guess what? 95% of our universe is not scientifically proven, right? Like if you add up, just empirically, if you add up all the mass energy of every particle, planet, galaxy, black hole, neutron star in the universe, it only accounts for 5% of the mass energy of the universe. The other 95% is dark matter and dark energy, which are basically placeholders. It's like, we don't know what this is. Let's call it dark matter and dark energy, not because it's dark and sinister, but just because we don't know what it is. And so science actually shows that there's a lot that we don't understand and accepts that. Scientism says that other 95%, we can't even talk about it.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think the hope of...
What if it's life matter?
Yeah.
And life energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Matthew, parting words for people, some advice.
Parting words.
What do you know now?
My parting advice would be that there's so much value and meaning and purpose that comes out of trying to do something that will be redemptive. And I think that if people are wrestling with their purpose or their meaning, I think that there's something to be discovered within them of what they were meant to do. And I think when you find that, it's a very invigorating path. I think when you get in alignment with that, despite with all the suffering, despite all the challenges that you might experience, there's nothing quite like being on the path. And so I would say trying to get in touch with that. Yeah.
Magnificent, Matthew. Thank you. What a gift. What a blessing.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for being on. This was awesome.
Yeah.